Now, folks, I want you to think about this for a moment here. It's September 19th of 1796. And President Washington has published a letter in a Philadelphia newspaper, the American Daily Advertiser. And the president has said it was to the American people. And what the president said is, we are going to hold our annual elections. My term is coming up, and I will not submit my name for another term as President of the United States. This was groundbreaking. This was significant. This was huge change taking place. The president who had organized our country, our government, we had now 16 states. We've added Vermont, Tennessee, and Kentucky. But this is revolutionary. This is a big change. The year is 1796. It just so happens in that same year, the Boston-based state legislature decided they were going to kill entrepreneur John Brown of Providence, Rhode Island's grand scheme for building a canal from the booming seaport of Providence up to this tiny hamlet of Worcester as he made his way north, because John Brown's scheme was remarkable. Although I don't believe he ever been to the Green Mountains, he had a design for a canal to go up through Worcester, cut across through parts of Massachusetts into New Hampshire. They were going to kill the idea. And the newspaper at the time, the Massachusetts Bay, had quoted the legislature by saying, you know, if they build a canal from Providence to Worcester, Boston will turn into an insignificant fishing village. So the canal didn't happen. Now, Washington, that was a very parochial way of looking at life. And that was the way things were back then. Everything was very parochial. Now, Washington, that was a major concern of his as he was leaving the presidency, because his concern was, we're Americans first. We're not Virginians, we're not Tennesseans, we're not Vermonters or New Yorkers. We're Americans. And with this big expanse of a country, how can we possibly tie together an American identity, a national identity? It was a big concern, not only of Washington, but all the leaders of this time. Jefferson, Adams, Hamilton, all of them were concerned about, how do you take this sprawling country and turn it into an American identity? It was a big question at the time, and he didn't have a very good answer for it. So we have this situation here where we have the sprawling country, and it was Europeans were fascinated by this, because remember, Europe was very small. Matter of fact, there's a story I heard when just coming from Germany. The Europeans don't think Americans have a very good sense of time. And what they say is, you know, you think 200 years is a long time. Having stood in cathedrals that date back to 1015, you know, over 1,000 years, a century, 1,000 years, they may have a point. Of course, Americans think Europeans don't have a sense of distance, because they always think 200 miles is a really far way. And we go up to the White Mountains, we go down to Newport, we travel all times. That's not an issue. In Europe, very closely compacted countries, very close to one another. America was this wide open, rambunctious, young republic that was just thriving with all this energy and trying new things. And it was just an amazing place to be. 1824, this is 30 years, just about 30 years after this 1796, where the Boston legislature said goodbye to the canal. We are starting to build a canal in Rhode Island. Rhode Island jumped the gun a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But the point is, they're starting to build the canal. By 1827, there's 1,000 men working between Northbridge and Worcester on this section of the canal. And if you step over here for a second, I want you to take a look at this. Now, I will tell you there are ticks, all right? So I'll try not to put you in poison ivy, but the ticks... No, this is not poison. Anyhow, so be careful. But this was what they were building. Now, essentially, 1,000 men are working, about 800 are Irish. 800 had come from Ireland to the Erie Canal, who are now working on the Blackstone, and they were making a lot of progress up and down the valley. This was known as Upper Farmansville at the time. This was not Fisherville. Matter of fact, there was no dam over there. The river was over there. There was also, at the same time, we're talking about they're building a mill, four-story textile mill just down here where the Waskenut J.J. O'Donnell's is today. So this was what they were building. It's essentially a prism, 37, 38 feet on top, about 17 on the bottom, no more than 4 to 5 feet deep. and it would carry a canal boat that was roughly 70 feet long up or down, depending on where you're going. Now, I took some pictures because I have always had problems with folks trying to get their hand around how they moved up and down a canal, what happened when they came to a lock. So we're going to go across the street in a bit to see how a lock that's been reused multiple times, so it's hard to see. And with some of the pictures I have, I hope to be able to give you a really good understanding of how locks worked and why they're no different today than they were back in 1828. The technology for building canal is not exactly revolutionary. You know, you put men on the moon, but you can, you know, Emperor Charlemagne, to give you a point, in 793, started building a canal. He ran into some of the problems that the Rhode Islanders started in 1824 because too much water, blew out a dam, flooded all his work, gave it up. But 793, he's building a canal because he saw it as a very effective way to connect the Rhine River with the Danube. And that's what John Brown was trying to do. Now, why a canal? Well, our roads were horrible. In the book about Lewis and Clark, nothing moved faster than a horse in the year 1800. No idea, no letter, no bushel of wheat, no barrel of cider. Nothing moved faster than a horse. So if I am on a horse, I'm not going fast. And so what happened with John Brown is he had this amazing shipping business where he was bringing in all kinds of goods from all around the world. He come into Providence and he couldn't take it anywhere. It was so costly to put it on a wagon to take it inland that it made it of no value. So either they stayed in a warehouse and rotted, or he sold it for a much reduced rate. So that's why he wrote his congressman suggesting this canal route. So our roads are horrible. The way they're coming up with this concept is a canal. Now the beauty of the canal was it was all natural. We're using water. We're right next to the Blackstone River. The early engineers thought this would be a marvelous resource. However, how many of you have been on the Blackstone in summer? A lot of water? No, not really, is there? How about winter? What happens in winter? Freezes, absolutely. So canaling was a little bit of a challenge, even under good conditions. So that was one of the issues we had to deal with. But right now, it essentially is a crew of 6 would rough out about a half-mile section. They moved about 2 cubic yards of dirt an hour. And if you wanted to work, like the economy's bad today, I'd give you a shovel. You could have a shovel. And I'd test you, see if you could move 2 cubic yards of dirt in an hour. And then by the end of the day, you were still standing upright and feeling good, then I'd hire you. If you weren't, you didn't get the job, but I still got your labor out of that, and you still didn't get paid. This was kind of like a test. So that was one of the key things about it. So they would rough out this section, and roughing would mean they would go up about 1 inch a mile. And then they needed a lock because, you know, it drops about 451 feet between Worcester, Kelly Square, the last lock, and Providence. So they go up about 1 inch, and that's really fine engineering, incidentally. And there were no engineering schools. West Point was the only engineering school at the time, and it was just getting started. It would become one of our major engineering schools during the 30s and 40s. But up at this time, it was just a brand new institution, just getting its way. And the engineers who built the Erie Canal had actually invented many of the tools that they used because they cleared old growth trees. They had amazing systems with horses and winches and saws to cut these trees and take out the entire root ball because they needed a very fine prism for the canal. So it was amazing what was taking place in this very rambunctious country. So this canal we have here is a perfect example. The one thing that is not a perfect example is along the side here. If you notice, there's some tree stumps. There's a nice birch tree there. There's what we call scrub vegetation. Horses were pulling these canal boats. Horses were pulling these 35-ton boats carrying material up to Worcester. They carried casks of lime. They carried lumber. They carried corn, wheat, barley, machinery to be used in Worcester in the new fledgling industries. So all this was going upstream here. 2 horses back to back were pulling it. So we didn't have this stuff to catch. This was a very pristine landscape. because they're using ropes. So there's nothing here. If you can almost envision for a moment, nothing here but a nice gentle slope here with a very profound towpath for the horses to work on. There were, however, if I was to move that birch tree another 10 feet in that direction, there were some shade trees periodically planted along here. So when the horses were going along like this, they would have some shade over here. But that's it. All this stuff would not be here. They really worked very hard to make sure their most valuable asset, which was not the captain, and it wasn't the kid that was leading the horses or the crewman, it was the horses themselves. They wanted to protect them. So, they didn't have ocean a day, but I think they might have had something like it because they had some really interesting laws at the time. Horses couldn't go faster than 3 or 4 miles an hour. They could only go 12 miles at any one time. So they kind of created this other wonderful industry for farmers, because what would happen, the farmer have 2 kids, a 10 and a 12-year-old, they would come down, take those tired horses after 12 full miles of pulling 35 tons of material, take them up to the barn and bring another fresh set down, hook them up, and off they'd go. So this is how they used local farmers as part of their canal business, if you will. They got paid as they went along, so it worked out very, very nicely. So this is what it looks like, except for this piece. And what we're trying to do here, and actually Paul Vigin was one of the significant players here with DEP, we were trying to clean up and restore the canal here. And we ran into some issues with some of the folks with conservation about this, but hopefully we'll put this back the way it originally was, because it gives you a really good sense of how the canal was. Now, what I'd like to do is walk up here to the street. I'd like to cross the street. I will lead and Terry will stand out there too. Remember, we're federal employees. It doesn't matter if we get run over or not. And we bounce back very quickly. I was able to take some pictures to show you some really good ideas to kind of envision how a lock would work. So, look in here, and there are some initial stones here, but this has been reused multiple times. Mills have been built on top of it, a turbine's put in, water wheel, turbine. So not just as a lock, it's been used in many, many ways, and that is the way the Blackstone Canal has functioned throughout its long life. Even after the canal died, it really didn't die. It's been used over and over again. So folks, I will pass this around, but here is a picture of a lock. This is a lock in Prague. It's right near the Prague Hilton, matter of fact. As you can see, the gate's right here. It's a V. Can you see that, folks, all right? Yep, yep. All right. Now, what I can tell from this picture is that a boat going upstream has the right of way, would pull right in here. The boats would close behind it. So here's your front, okay? Notice how much water is on the other side here. Okay, folks? Notice how much water? Oh, yeah, yeah. So I'm going upstream there, so I'm being lifted up to that area, okay? On the back of this picture is the back that's happening. I've already pulled in, and the gate is closing behind me. So now I'm in there nice and snug. And folks, when I tell you snug, I mean snug. This is a picture, and you're looking down if you can. You're looking down. Canal wall is one side, the canal boat is on the other. There's about this much, and that was one of the wider places we had. Because, you know, the canal boats were 9.5 feet wide. 9.5 feet wide. Can you see that down there, folks? 9.5 feet wide. They put on some cedar shakes on the front of the hull, so when it went in there and it would bounce, it wouldn't chip the hull at all. So we're talking, and the canal locks themselves were only 10 feet wide. So we're in there just like this, snug as a rug. See that? Actually, why don't we pass that around so you guys can take a look at that and get a good sense of that. So anyhow, we're inside. The way it worked on the Blackstone is the kid was running the crewman who was on top. He would move stuff, low bridge, everybody down. He would get out and open these little tiny tiller gates that were at the bottom of these big oak doors. And I want to show you a picture here because, oh yeah. This is a door. It goes into the side. Think oak. And that's exactly how it was with the Blackstone Canal. Just think oak. I was open, and remember that one picture here? They swing in, to the inside the wall, so I just fit through. They're actually indented into the wall. And so this becomes this steel door, but think oak, because that's what oak is here. That's why we don't have any oak doors around anymore. They rotted a long time ago, but that's kind of how it worked. It's kind of a fascinating little story. So we're inside now. The guy is opening up. If we're going upstream, we're bringing water in from our little reservoir. For example, we're heading up here. As you notice how big this area was, they generally had a bigger pond on the upside of the canal, because that's why we let water in to lift the boat up. Now I want to show you a picture here. There's two actually. This is a good one. This I took from the cabin window. I'm coming up, and so you can see right there the edge, you know, and the other side I took one a little later. All right. So one is, and you know, if you look carelessly, there's some wonderful German Riesling Moselle vineyards off to the side there. But that's how it looked like. So a boat's coming in here, the gates are closed, the gates open, I can go forward. I've been lifted up. And that's how they work. And there are only two really good locks left. One's at the state park at Riverbend up by Goat Hill. The other one is down in Millville. It's an excellently preserved lock. It's part of the state park there, and it's very accessible. But you'll notice on the downstream side how rounded it is. And here's a picture. You know, this canal was built between 1970 and 1992. Notice how rounded it is. Same technology, folks. Same technology. So anyhow, so very easily, the technology we see here with the remnants of what is in the Blackstone is also the remnants we find is still working in various European who still use their canals to a large degree. Which was really fascinating. There were 50 locks on the trip I took. We spent a whole day in a lock. Now, what happens, most of those are at night, so you're not in a lock all day, but it was really very fascinating as you see how they opened up the boats. Now, the one picture I will show you that a lot of people have difficulty with understanding has to do with what happens to the upstream boat. There's another boat waiting. Here we go. Here's a picture. You notice I'm being lifted up, but there's a boat in the background there. See that? So when I get up, I'll go to the left of him, all right? And he'll get in the lock. Now he can go, because the lock is the water. He's going downstream, so he goes in at the high level, and then he'll drop down to the next one and go like that. So and the other side, again, it shows you how close it is once you pass that around too.
How long of a wait is there if you're waiting for a boat that's in there?
Well, you know, that's a good question. How long a wait when one boat goes in, you're waiting? It runs about 20 minutes for some of these places. You know, depends on conditions and everything.
That's a good long wait.
Yeah. That's why when I say we spent, you know, they figured the whole day in a lock, that's because 20 minutes, you go down and then out, you come in, there's a red light there. Their water use is much more revolutionary in the sense that we had reservoirs up here. And for those who lived in Millbury, Darty Pond, Ramshorn Pond in Sutton, there were numerous ways we would try to get water into the canal. It was always an issue. Never had enough water. And so when you had a stream coming down here, I would find a way to put water in here.
Now, how many locks was there between Worcester and Rhode Island?
Good question. How many locks there were? There were 48. 48 locks. They were all made out of granite, too.
Wow.
And they moved about 5 to 6,000 cubic feet of water to move a boat. So think about that, which is one of the reasons, folks, the canal went out of business, because when you go down to Rhode Island, Providence is over on the Meshasik watershed, and Pawtucket's on the Blackstone watershed, and Providence is where the Meshasik is. So that's where the big seaport is. So when I'm taking water out of the river down in the Rhode Island, the mills of the Blackstone below Ashton started seeing their water wheels slow down, their turbines slow down. They started seeing everything slow down, and they were very unhappy, not happy people. So what would happen? They'd sue they'd sue the canal company. And the canal company said, hey, we're good guys, we put water in, what do you mean you're suing us? But they said, well, we're losing production because we're losing water and we're losing power. But the canal lost every single one of those lawsuits. Actually, Daniel Webster was one of the lawyers and one of the notable ones in 1834. And what would happen is when the canal went out of business, I had no money to give you. So I would say to you, I'd say, you know, I want you to take all you guys and you can have Lock 12. All this beautifully cut granite stone. Well, you have it for your house, you have it for a raceway, you have it for your new mill, whatever, you would take all this granite stone. So there are places, and if you just go up here toward, on the other side of the river from where the Saundersville mill is, there are a couple of lock sites there. And the only reason you know that, there's a couple of stones they didn't get. There's a couple of stones they didn't get. Now, if you're driving around and you go over Church Street in Northbridge, you know where the state park is there, just become, that, where it crosses the canal there by Plummer's Landing, that is actually a canal lock. Pull into that, parking area, get out and look up and you'll see the downside section of the canal. They use it for a bridge abutment on Church Street there. So you get a good sense of how these locks were used. You know, they just built a bridge right on top of it.
Did any of the boats ever get stuck in the lock?
No, that's a good question. I don't believe so, but I have no idea. They didn't leave records. Did boats get stuck coming up into the lock or somewhere? The answer, yeah. They ran out of water. But I don't know if you remember last summer on the Danube, last fall actually, they had major droughts in Germany and Austria. Some of these cruises that go on river roads had problems. They got caught on low water on these rivers. So it's whenever you use water, you have to remember Mother Nature has got to be on your side. Otherwise, you could have problems. And at the same time, when the water was high, you couldn't get, your bridges are this high. And if you're this high, you can't go. You'll have to put on your engines, go backwards, and wait for the water to drop. And I found it interesting on the canal boat we were on, and you can't see it here, but the captain's bridge actually had hydraulics and would drop down below deck. So it was as high as a deck. Oh, thank you. Actually, you can look at that and we'll pass that around. And
are these collapsed down?
Yes,
the railings?
yes, very good. So these are all collapsed down because it's low bridge. So the crew, when we got to one of these particular bridges.
This is a lock gate? This is a
Yes,
lock gate?
that's a lock gate,
Is?
yes. And they were designed the same way here in the Blackstone as you see there.
And what were they made of?
Oak.
They were oak too?
Yeah, these are
metal railings.
these are metal, big iron, steel, fantastic. You can see here. Here's a good example of what it would look like.
Oh, on the other side.
Yeah, and here's another one that gives you an idea what it looks like to be in a lock before you go up.
How many miles was it?
We had some archaeological survey done here with PAL, Public Archaeology Lab, because this is where the site of Lock 30 was. And we're trying to find out how much is original. And they were not able to come up with too many stones that were original. They surveyed the Millville Lock, they surveyed the Goat Hill Lock, they surveyed the Plummer's Landing Lock. And they said, well, that stone maybe and that stone maybe, but this is where it is. But it's been so reused that we cannot possibly say this how it worked here. There still are turbines down underneath here, the center part. As you can see, these other cement pieces are here to clean up what over here is a really significant oil spill. What happened here, and I have a picture of the mill so you can have a sense of just how big it was. And I have several copies, so I'll pass these around for you. This is the Fisherville mill. I want to say it's a probably, turn of the century photo. And this is the original mill that was here on top. All right, here's another one of that. Okay, so share that with everybody. So what happened here, the mill's over here, and believe it or not, they actually had a mill pond behind the mill. So mill would flow through, and they used water in all kinds of ways to create power. Over there, they had a huge drum for heating oil, thick home heating oil. And our belief is that it was broken and no one figured it out, and they kept pouring more oil into it and pouring more oil in it because they've been fixing it, working with this, since probably 2005, but Gene Burnett's been in here, pumping it out, putting cleaners in here, And they still have all this oil that keeps going through here. What they've done now, which is really rather revolutionary, this whole project here is totally revolutionary, but what they've done is they've injected micro, what is the term? John, can you remember? Some kind of bio fuel, but that's not the right concept, into the ground that will actually activate all these,
Microbes.
yes, that will eat the oil. Now what they're seeing take place here is they're already seeing the viscosity of the oil get much thinner. So they already know it's starting to work. I wish I could remember the name of the stuff they insert. Of course, on the way home I'll remember what it is. But it's, Terry, you, pardon me? It could be, could be. But anyhow, they're injecting it in over there. As you can see, that whole landscape over there is right over where the that drum was. That leaked and was filled up. Yes, sir.
Was the Fisherville mill on this site here?
One of the buildings was originally, yes.
Right over here.
Well, the original Fisherville mill, the four-story one, in one of these photos, folks, that goes around, yes, that, if you hold that up, that's one, yeah, that was here, right here. Then they used it, there was a machine shop over in this neck of the woods, and the big mill was built over here in 1870 after this was all burned down. So 1870 is where you see the renaissance or the growth of this village here. And when I take people on bus tours, I take them up here to Fisherville because it's one of the best intact mill villages because the houses are so close together. The company stores, the other side is on Ferry Street. There's a post office there. There's a small library there. This is an 1880 to 1920 kind of village. And it's wonderful to show people just how it is. The problem is I don't have a mill anymore. But sometimes the landscape here in the Blackstone Valley, it's almost like a detective puzzle. Where is the mill? Or where is the church? Or where's the school? Because I see the other elements. The housing's up there and the housing's over there. One of the houses on the corner over here is actually an old hotel. So you'll get a lot. The community center, I think Phil Gothier mentioned that in his talk tonight, that folks really gravitated. This was, everybody walked around here. It was a key piece. My mother-in-law's sister worked in the bank over there. And what happened, the president of the mill said to the president of the bank in the center of town, he said, you know, my guys can't get their checks cashed because, or put them in the bank because your hours are closed. Can you put one down here? And so the guy said, yeah, sure. So that's the bank you saw, a 1937 bank. You know, Anna Gerard was the, or Anna Small at the time. She worked here. She got a job over there working, opening the bank, taking everybody's manila envelopes. I mean, I know for some of the younger folks here, I don't have too many younger folks here, but everyone could get your, you know, you got paid, you know, $21.72 to be in a manila envelope. It's just, it was, you know, people today say, what? But anyhow, that was one of the things that took place here. So this is a very close-knit area here. And so when the mill was burned, it was a disaster for lots of the folks here. There were portions of the canal that used the river. And the reason for that, if the canal had been built in the early 1790s as originally planned, they couldn't have done that. But by 1824, there are a number of mills who had big dams already built. One in Millville is in particular. Once above that Millville Dam, which is on Central Street in Millville, the canal enters the river there and stays in that way all the way up almost to Route 122. And then it goes into a long stretch there by Skull Rock Lock that takes you up toward the railroad tracks behind the Cock and Kettle. So if you folks know where the Cock and Kettle is, the canal runs right along the tracks there. Actually, there are pieces of the canal still there. The tracks are more or less on the towpath. So you get a sense there. So yes, they call it slack water navigation. I would fortify, and Millbury has an excellent example of this fortified canal towpath. It's deep in the woods on National Grid property, and one day we'll get a walking tour there and I'll show you how neat they've done there. But they really fortified where the horses would walk so it wouldn't get washed out. And you'd call that slack water navigation, where I would use the river as the trench and the river bank as the towpath. And then every time the water got too quick, too big a drop, I went back and dug the trench again. So very good question, very good question.
Off of Pleasant Street up in Saundersville, they were in the river also.
Yes, Now, the interesting thing here is that in Grafton, right by Pleasant Street, the river is taken over the canal. It looks like the river goes underneath the bridge. The river actually goes off to the left there. If you go to Pleasant Street, and it looks, it's all very tepid and slow moving, and the river goes down here just rocking and rolling. Well, water seeks very easy venues. You know, if I could go here and I don't have to work very hard, I'll go there. If I go here and not work, so the water just races down that canal, which further down has been so destroyed, you can't tell it's a canal. It looks like a river. If you're down just up from where John, you and Don and I went one day, which is close to railroad tracks, up from the elementary school, but down from the bridge, from the Pleasantville Bridge. It's very interesting. Actually, one of the fun things is trying to find out where the canal really is, because it's in some places you wouldn't think of. And it's accessible, but it's been eroded so much you would say, well, that doesn't look like a canal. And I was mentioning to a couple of ladies earlier about Tricentennial Park, which is a marvelous park Sutton put together. But if you stand in the park and look across Singing Dam, the other side, the canal is right over there. And there's a picture that shows the canal at the same level as the water above the dam. But today, when you look down, it looks like it's 18 feet down. That's all erosion that's taking place because of Mother Nature. But before, it's a very clean environment. Actually, Ann Morgan has a picture here in Grafton that looks that way toward the hill there, and the canal is pristine. There's no trees here at all. And that's pretty much when the canalers came through here in the 1820s to build it. There were no trees here. They were using them for heat, using them for cooking, using for building. You know, it was pretty much a landscape denuded of forest because everybody was using everything at the time. And so, you know, when we think of today, we look at a much more forested landscape than our forefathers used back in the 20s and turn of the century and 1800s, and even 1900s. You'll see some here, and for some of you, I don't know if you looked over the other side, this is a picture of the Fisherville Mill during the 37 hurricane. You know, that's right down here. You know, it's actually pass that around. It's a good picture. But you can see how much water is there. There's a nice picket fence, and look at. Yeah, that Model T kind of gives it away, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But about 6 or 7 years ago, we couldn't get through either.
So Chuck, Farmersville was up the river?
Down there. Farmersville's down there.
Where's down there?
If you go, follow 122 around past the Polish Hall, get back on 122. This is 122A. Make a right on 122, go down to Depot Street. You'll see the big Wesconut J.J. O'Donnell's Farmersville Mill.
Where's Saundersville?
Saundersville is just up the street here. Elmwood Street, South Main up here.
Left is the tower chimney.
Yes, Saundersville still has that lovely chimney in place with all the intricate tan sandstone, if you will. But that's in tough shape. I was in late March, early April, before everything bloomed. I had a chance to take the camera up and go behind on the other side of the river. I won't tell you how I got there because every time I tell people that, Province of Worcester Railroad calls me up and says, "What are you doing on the track?" So I won't tell you how I got there. But that's the way. Behind there is an amazing amount of millworks on the other side of the river, the east side of the river, and that's where a couple of these locks are. Because when the canal came up through Pleasant Street, it was in the river a little bit, then it went up on the east side past the mill and past that where the dam was. And there's some really nice work in there, and I have no idea. You know, it's obviously not canal oriented, but it's well after part of the Saundersville Mill complex, but I had no idea it was so intricate in there. So mucking around in the woods sometimes can be an awful lot of fun.
So are you saying the canals switch sides of the river at various points?
Yes.
How would they traverse the river with the barges?
Actually, the barges, it was the horses that had to move. So they would have towpath bridges. In Millville, if you're down by what used to be called for locals Dead Man's Curve, you know where all that is, down there between the Blackstone Millville line, Gabby Hartnett Boulevard, I think is what they call it. The railroad bridge is there. Well, it used to be much more friendly. They kind of filled it in and straightened out the road there because it was really dangerous, a lot of accidents back in the 40s and everything. There was a towpath bridge there where they swapped over from one side to another. And if you think about it, the canal is coming up on the river on the east side, and then it has to go over the left side where the canal is, and it was a towpath bridge that did that. So it was kind of one of the interesting aspects of finding stuff in the woods. There's a towpath bridge where they actually change sides, and it's like an off-ramp on I-95, because the horses would cross the bridge. They wouldn't drop the ropes. They would cross the bridge and then go down underneath it, so they didn't have to unhitch them with the ropes at all. So it really is exactly like we would think of as an off-ramp on a highway today. Same technology, same kind. I just come around like this to go underneath, to go north. And so that was fairly well documented. They did that frequently. One of the problems they would have in April when they started canal season up again was going back and fixing all these towpath bridges and these other things, because as we know, we had a tough winter, lots of ice and snow, down trees. They would take them out, just take them right down. So there was always that kind of the maintenance guys in 1829 and 1830, as they started in the high point of the canal, would have a lot of work to do in your springtime.
Were the bridges made of wood?
Yes. The only thing made of locks were only made of granite were the locks and some of the coffer dams on the side to bring water in and keep the level in the canal so it wasn't moving very fast. They wanted a very steady flow in there so the horses could manage. And so if there's too much water, there's always another one to let the water out.
When did these three textile mills stop working?
Well, this one was known as Press Wheel, and that was 60s. That was doing stuff in the 60s, because I know that my wife's brothers all worked here. So I want to say maybe 71, 70, that was the last it went out. J.J. O'Donnell's was probably about the same time. Again, they made covers for GM cars. I want to say Buicks or Pontiacs. So there's still some manufacturing taking place in there. And when I first came in the valley 19 years ago, their turbine was working. They actually had a working turbine in there. Since that time, and one of my colleagues, Peter Coffin, used to do tours in there with the mill owners of Proville. But that hasn't been there since, I want to say, 94, 95. So anyhow, one of the things that we kind of talked a little bit out here was the change has happened here. You know, we started talking about Washington and thinking about, well, you know, the nation is changing. I'm not going to run for president. We're going to have to get somebody else. The change in what was happening in Europe. You know, 1824, Beethoven actually composes the Ninth Symphony and showcases it in Vienna, I think, in May of 1824. 1824, we start building the canal. You know, having a context for all the changes that took place in our relatively young history. You know, the Europeans make fun of us because we think 200 years is an old time. Well, War 1812 was 200 years old. And that was the second time we fought the English, which means by 1824, we've already had 5 presidents. We fought England again. And we have this very, very robust entrepreneurial economy that is really attracting all kinds of attention. I mean, Europeans came here because they did not understand what Americans were. And if you think about the War of 1812 is really a significant landmark in our history because it's that time when we begin to get an American identity, when we begin to come together as a nation. We think of ourselves as Americans, not as Francophiles, not as Anglophiles, but as Americans. We're no longer interested in Canada. That didn't work out. But it's a major turning point, and you'll find a lot of the businesses that really started here in the Blackstone Valley began in that period between a time of the non-intercourse acts and the embargo acts, where we weren't getting stuff from Europe, so we started our own stuff. And then people started saying, well, you know, our textiles, it's not that bad, we can do that. So this idea of change, as we see here, as we look at the radical and environmentally innovative technology that we're using to clean the river that we threw everything in after the technology revolution, is really an amazing way to think about our own history, how change is a constant. And I would propose to you that if we're looking into the future, for those of us who can deal with change, those are the people who are going to survive and survive nicely. Those who have difficulty with change, and I know my own family there's a number who have difficulty with change, it is going to be a struggle because change is happening at such a rapid rate. I can't tell you how fast and different things. All we have to do is see how people interact today. You know, I got my phone here and I didn't, you know, half the time I'll just be going down like this, you know. The interaction has changed. My wife calls the Facebook a non-social network. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. But change is one of those things, those who can adapt and those think about change, because we will continually change and our institutions will have to adapt as we go. A point that I'll make before I let you all go, because I've probably talked longer than I should, but if you think about climate change and cultural resources, when I say climate change, there's a fort up in Manitoba, in Churchill, Manitoba in Canada. And for most of you, Churchill is where the polar bears raid the garbage dump that we see all those National Geographic. Well, there's a fort there that was built in 1742 by the English in case the French were going to go after that garbage dump, I think. And it's sinking. It's built on permafrost. So it's sinking. Now that's one of those things, I can measure that. When we talk about climate change, I can actually measure how much that's sinking, how long it's taking to sink. And that's something that I can prove. Same is true in Dawson. You know, the Yukon, the gold rush. The historic district in Dawson is built on permafrost. So there are a number of things that are happening to our cultural resources that are changing to the point where in the Park Service, we're starting to look very differently at our National Register process. Because if you remember from Hurricane Irene, some of the historic sites in Vermont got swept away. They were caught downstream, they moved them. Well, that's not, the register says you can't do that. Now, it's still a historic building, it still had the function it once had, it's just not where it used to be because the river moved it.
And if the river moves it, you don't have much.
That's it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very, very much. I will hang around to answer as many questions you want. But think about this concept of change in our own life and how things are continually, seem to be moving very quickly. But I think that if we adapt and we have that longer view, we'll do much better. So thank you very much.